day,
Yeah.
that's a good thing. But are you looking?
So you can see me and hear me.
Yeah, and it looks like we're live. I've got the yellow box saying live up there, so that's cool. It's saying we're live, which is always good.
Just want to make sure that people can see you or I live, because we had that problem before.
Yeah, I'll just log on to another account, and that's going to tell us. I've got another account running. Yeah, no, I can see you, mate, and I can hear you, so that's all cool. So who we got here? We've got hold on, mate. We've got Soda Pop. And What's Up, Doc? I remember What's Up, Doc. What's Up, Doc was I'm sure What's Up, Doc was on our first couple of shows. Is that true, What's Up, Doc? I'm sure he's going to tell us anyway. I never forget a name.
Or a face.
I never forget a name.
Or a face.
Or a face. No, yeah. Hold on. I'll go to the chat. So how's your week been so far?
Oh, not bad. Yeah. It's just kick along nice.
We have been talking about Bo. Yeah, Bo Diddley. Yeah. Yeah, you're right, Doc. What's up, Doc? That's cool. So this is the new time frame now. We're probably a little bit earlier for you cats in North America, because we've got daylight saving now, so we're an hour earlier than what we have previously done. Is that correct, Carl?
Yeah. We get the day is an hour longer. We lose sleep at night, so longer day, shorter night.
Yeah. So I had a couple of guys in a couple of other shows asking what time we were going to be on, and had to clarify that for them. How goes it tonight? Yeah, pretty good.
That's only one time a year you can be late for work.
That's the day after daylight saving.
It's the only excuse you got. Oh, I forgot.
Well, what's interesting is I read is it in Europe they've ditched daylight saving.
Some people don't like it, eh? I mean, there was a Facebook joke. They're saying, why can't they do it at 4 o'clock on a Friday so we get off work earlier?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of it. It takes a couple of weeks for me to get used to it.
I don't know. But I guess in a way good for the summer, but our summers are so short. I mean, maybe it's good for 3 months, not 6 months.
Yeah. So what's Soda Pop saying? Soda Pop saying, nice, Carl, but where are the poms? Pom-poms. Oh, yeah. So have you got a hat on? Yeah, where's your pom-pom?
Oh, yeah.
It's spring here, but it's a bit nippy still.
Yeah. I felt like wearing
it. Yeah. I always wear a hat. Fender, it's 1:38 a.m. in Canada. Holy cow.
Wow.
Thank you. Well, you should be sleeping, but instead you're wasting time with us. Awesome. Yeah. Waste some time with a couple of Kiwis.
Have a strong cup of coffee in the morning, or have whiskey now.
Take your pick. Hey, we got some good feedback from the last show on Bo Diddley, and I did some homework. If you guys can remember, I said a few times during the show that I didn't know anything about Bo Diddley, and I spent a few days listening to a few of his back catalogues, so I can certainly recommend him. And I suppose talking about Bo Diddley, I suppose we can't we can't not mention Otis Rush passing away yesterday.
84. 84 years old.
Wow.
So I had a funny feeling, I had a premonition that his time was not long. For the last 6 months, I was thinking to myself, Otis has been hanging on so long. We talked about Buddy Guy last week, and it's funny we mentioned it last week that they're still considered contemporaries of the Chicago blues sound because they were so young when it all. People forget then when Muddy Waters did his first song in '55, he was about 42 years old. So Otis and Buddy Guy were in their early 20s and mid 50s, and they were considered young guys. And I still consider them young, but they're in their early 80s now. So very 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 sad, but what a great life, and what a testimony to a unique sound. He played the guitar upside down. How can we think of Led Zeppelin without thinking of Otis Rush? I Can't Quit You, Baby,
Oh, what when I think of Otis Rush, for me, it's Clapton. Being a Clapton nut. He's covered a few songs that Otis did, but you're right. He played a guitar not unlike this, but he played it like that, didn't he?
Yes.
With the strings, with the bottom E on the bottom,
like Albert King. Yep.
Yeah. Whereas Jimi Hendrix played left hand, but he had the bottom E at the top, didn't he?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Otis had a very, very unique sound in the sense that he could bend the strings like no one else, and had such an amazing voice, like a tenor, like almost like, I mean, we know it's gospel, but almost like if he was to audition for a choir, then they would say, "You're in."
I almost think from a technical point of view that these guys that bend the strings, I'm sure that there must be something about having that thin toppy on the top and going this way.
Possibly.
Yeah, but I can't obviously play it like that because I'm not left-handed. But it'll be interesting to actually ask, as opposed to us, like going like that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure that has something to do with it.
I imagine, and there's no such thing. I used to always be quite not robotic, but like orthodox. There is a lot of appeal in being unorthodox, I reckon, because I mean everybody that plays guitar wants a unique sound. They got it because what they did was unorthodox.
They all did, and it's interesting too because we've spoken about it before. You go and watch some guy playing a version of a song his way, and he'll play his. Again, we'll get a guitar. It's good. So he might play his E chord here.
Yeah.
Can you see? So he might play his E chord like this. Okay. And someone will say, "Oh no, you should be playing it down here."
Right.
As an example, and often people would say, "But that's how I play it." So I wonder how these guys related to each other when they were sitting there having a couple of shots and they're jamming away and they're playing a song. I wonder if someone said, "Oh no," Hubert saying to Otis, "No, you don't play it that way. You play it this way."
No, I think they would let them be, because a classic example. You mentioned Eric Clapton. You mentioned Otis Rush, but Eric Clapton's one of his signature songs on that Blues Breakers album was Hideaway, and I play the Hideaway version. I learnt it the Eric Clapton way, but I play it now the Freddie King version. But it's great that Eric gave it his own sound and rocked it up. And, you know, there's multiple ways you can play Hideaway. You know, there's multiple ways you can play the E chord.
Well, you've got Stevie Ray Vaughan's version of it too.
Yeah, which is closer to Freddie's, but he gave it that Texas boogie woogie sound.
Absolutely.
Eric Clapton's version was amazing and really his own, which is a testimony to a 21-year-old. Wow.
20-year-old.
Oh, was it 20? Was it? Wow.
20. And but that's very clever musicians and a band leader knowing what to do for their audience, because obviously they needed something. You know, I think the word that you used it earlier in an earlier show was that rave, and with the Stones, like how they sped up a few songs because, you know, people wanted to dance, young people, so they sped it up a bit, obviously for their audience.
Right. Yeah. The college sound.
Yeah. So yeah, Otis Rush, what a legend.
What a shame. Yeah.
Big influence on Peter Green and Fleetwood Mac and Danny Curran too, wasn't he?
I mean, yeah, he never got quite the credit he was deserved. I read some of his autobiography, not the actual book, but just the biography of his life. And he basically cut some Cobra singles. The Cobra was an independent black label that went bankrupt. And then he went to Chess, cut some Chess singles, never released an album.
Yep.
And then in the late 60s, he released an album with, I think, High Tone, and did an album with Mike Bloomfield, and did some sides on Vanguard. It was always he was always part of an album. He never actually had his own album or, you know, number one single. So he had to spend his whole life touring to make money.
Do you think he would have been forgotten had these British blues cats not spoken about him or made covers of his songs? Do you think he just would have been completely underground?
Possibly, because he only cut 45s. And 45s are a little bit like bubblegum. They're like very instant and they lose their flavour pretty quick. But I guess the English guys carried it on. Yeah, he explained in an interview I read that he was really quite bitter for most of his career because he never actually got to complete an album that he could oversee and appreciate. He was always part of a project or an album went, you know, it didn't sell too well or was going bankrupt, or, you know, I mean, he was well revered in Japan in certain places, but I mean, it's a hard life to keep touring. Sometimes it'd be nice to cut a song and just reap the rewards on your couch, you know, counting the numbers.
So we're going to just do a shout out here. We've got Simon, our friend from England, saying last of the old school bluesmen, certainly. And what's up, Doc? He's made a comment. They didn't have the resources we do, for sure. So that's when we were talking about these guys getting together, jamming, and just, I suppose, what really mattered for these guys was if it sounded good. If Carl's playing an E chord one way and I'm playing it another way and it sounds good, well, just go with it.
Well, I mean, Purple Haze, I mean, a musical teacher said it's all wrong, but to the radio audience, it sounds all right. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you know, you've got theory and you've got practice, and you know, sometimes one's right and sometimes one's wrong.
Yeah, sometimes something's mechanical where it fits into a box, and sometimes it's just like raw and outrageous where it's just like, you know, wow, it's different. I don't know.
Yeah, what's interesting though, before we go on to the show, I suppose I just want to top it off with Otis Rush. You know, I have to say that I've spent a couple of hours just checking out some of the work that he did, and thank God we've got YouTube, because there's some great clips out there of this guy playing, and just the professionalism of the guys that were supporting him on some of these clips. Gosh, they're good. And the fact you mentioned earlier, he had to tour to generate money, little bit like BB King, I suppose. BB King toured right up to the end because they just didn't have enough, I suppose, from the record sales to keep them going. Unlike, for example, the main theme of this show, the Stones, they don't have to tour, but they do it because they want to.
Yeah. It's a double-edged sword because part of them are bitter in the sense that why are these other people from across the channel reaping the rewards that we created? And the other side is, well, we're grateful to be in this position to play. Why don't we just enjoy it? And they basically, because they're so good, and they started out live, why don't they continue to play live? Is it all about the money or is it about the passion? So,
look, I think we're all men. We all live in the real world. We'd like to be idealistic and say, hey, well, I can afford to say it's just about the music because I'm not making an income from it, generating an income. I can afford to be that idealistic guitar player. But, these guys, left wherever and went to Chicago clearly to generate a living. Is it natural for them to feel bitterness? Is it natural for Otis Rush to feel bitter? Probably, but what kind of manager did he have? Did these guys have managers back then? I suppose they didn't. They were just relying on the guidance of the record producers, the record companies.
Yeah, I think it's just human nature, a human condition to compare yourself to other people. It's actually a bad nature, but we do it regardless. We look at the competition. We see them as competition. They're deemed superior while we think we're inferior. But are they really happy? I mean, how many people have we seen in the music business that had it all? Like we're going to talk about Elvis, but in the end had nothing. So
yeah. Well, I suppose, I we've had a bit of a catch up and we've generated some respect towards Otis. So I suppose you should kick off the topic of this show, which is
the Southern influence on the Stones and to a lesser degree the Beatles from I wouldn't say Anglo-Saxon perspective, but how society portrays it as a white perspective. As we know of as Elvis, the king of rock and roll, which I think is quite debatable because we've talked about Chuck Berry. How about we just call them the Kings with an S?
Yeah, Simon's just made a comment about the Stones. They don't need to tour, but they're still making $100 million a year from touring.
Maybe that pays for all Mick's kids.
Oh yeah, and Ronnie's kids. Yeah. Well, yeah. And I wonder if Brian Jones's kids are getting a cut of that too.
Golly.
So Elvis is the subject of this talk.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously we know the Stones kicked off. Well, the Beatles kicked off '62. The Stones kicked off 6 months later, late '62, more or less '63. But Elvis was on the scene '56, wasn't he? So '56, the first album came out. So imagine in England they would have had 2 channels, and one channel would have been entertainment occasionally. But I want to give a shout out to one guy a year prior who doesn't quite get the credit. Looking back, he is quite fatherly and conservative, but Bill Haley, Rock Around the Clock. That really started the ball rolling, that particular song, I think. As far as a music and excitement, a rebellion sort of thing.
Yeah.
So Bill Haley, Rock Around the Clock. Elvis comes along, young guy, 501, slick back gel, greasy haircut, Hanes t-shirt, white t-shirt, and the simple fact that he was the real deal. He came from a poor background. He had nothing to lose. And all he wanted to do was sing his mum a song for her birthday. And the rest was history. So the same conversation we had with the Stones about Chuck Berry and those early 45s and Keith Richards saying that, Johnny B. Good, the sound. Keith Richards talks about that in the same light with those Sun 45s, which were, to this day, is music gold.
Mm.
The Sun 40. Forget about RCA and the albums and the movies. Those original 45s were recorded in a cheap studio, Sam Phillips, Memphis, Tennessee, 100 degrees. And what a plug in that simple chord in, the world would never be the same.
Yeah, I bought a Gretsch over a year ago, and I came across Slim Jim. Who was the drummer from Stray Cats? Slim Jim?
Phantom. Someone Phantom?
Someone in the chat will know.
Phantom.
Anyway, he's got a biography, so I flicked through a copy of it online, and it's pretty cool. Anyway, getting back to Elvis, he said, if you want to know rock and roll, you need to go back and listen to the Sun recordings of Elvis Presley, which is what you've just said. So, thanks to Spotify, you key in Elvis and bang, there you go. Got the Sun recordings. So I spent a Sunday afternoon listening to those Elvis Sun recordings. By gosh, there's something there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, Mystery Train, that's all right.
Mystery Train is that's my favorite song.
And what I like about Elvis is he, I mean, Junior Parker didn't quite get the credit he deserves. He wrote that song, but Elvis gave it not necessarily life, but he gave it authenticity. He didn't. I mean, we know Elvis later on is watering down some songs, but those Sun records were 100% real. They were from the heart. It was a stripped down band. You mentioned the Stray Cats, double bass, stripped down drum kit, occasionally a piano, acoustic guitar. I mean, life, a little bit of reverb and a lot of energy. So simple, but so real, so good.
So this is my question to you guys and the people in the chat, because I seriously don't know the answer to this. So those recordings, what Elvis was doing with Scotty and who else was in the backing band, was that unique, or was that just something that guys were doing in the South? Was that sound prevalent?
Good question. There's an amazing box set. I own it. It's called The Sun Rockabilly Sound. And there are a lot of guys similar to Elvis at the same time doing some big things. Charlie Feathers, Robert Gordon, who was a contemporary in the early 80s, did a whole bunch of covers of guys around that same era. It's just so happened that Elvis had the look and the appeal, and he got the nod.
So Sam Phillips saw this. Sam Phillips was clever enough to see, obviously, because he'd been recording Black Cats for a while, hadn't he? And he was and he'd recorded gospel. So he was smart enough to see a handsome guy singing a bit of R&B, and he saw dollar signs.
Well, I think the Colonel saw dollar signs either initially, later on. I'm not sure how it goes, but we all know the famous line of, if I could find me a white boy that sounded like a coloured, I'd make $1 million.
Who said that? Sam Phillips?
The Colonel Parker said that. It's a famous rock quote.
No, but the work had already been done by Sam Phillips. I don't think the Colonel made Elvis. In fact, I would, well, the Colonel watered Elvis down.
Well, the Colonel came a little bit along on after the scene and renegotiated contract, and Sun was re-recorded in RCA in New York with all the the Eastern Europeans, which is a bit of a shame. But the Sun recordings are a bit like the Cobra and the Chess, just legendary, like you say. Energy, you cannot recreate that sound.
Or did Sam Phillips just hear Elvis, and what was he a producer, and he just recorded him purely from that idealistic point of view that this guy was great, this guy was good? I remember reading somewhere, now I'm starting to think, I remember reading that he sold Elvis, didn't he, for $50,000
To
because
RCA.
because he knew that he didn't have the ability to take Elvis to the limits that Elvis was going to go. So he was clever enough to pass them along. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. RCA was, a bit like Warner Brothers and Capitol. They're all tied up with the movies and soundtracks. I mean, soon as Elvis got signed in New York and the Colonel got involved, Elvis went from the rockabilly cat in the South doing the gospel, R&B, blues, rock and roll, rockabilly to basically the start of the Control happened. Hey, Elvis, we're doing Love Me Tender, and you get to provide a soundtrack. We're doing an album called Loving You. You can do, you're going to join the army. You're going to be patriotic. You're going to be, we're going to,
Well, he did it. A couple of those films were pretty good, though. Like King Creole's pretty cool. Jailhouse Rock's pretty cool.
Yeah. But I mean, I remember going through a big phase where I read a lot of his books, and he just got overworked and tired. He felt like a puppet, like a pigeon. He was like pigeonholed into a certain place where he was like, he felt, and when he was very much like a black guy on the plantation. He would always say, yes, sir, no, sir, ma'am. Part of him was a bit like Muddy Waters. He knew where he came from, which was impoverished, and he didn't want to give that up. And he did like the lifestyle, but part of him was really tired. So it was...
I see some similarities between Elvis and what was happening with the blues guys, the R&B guys in America. Many times we've made the connection that the blues guys were going down that Nat King Cole road of lounge music, and clearly that's the road Elvis was on, wasn't he? After being that, for lack of a better word to describe him, a rockabilly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Elvis is, with everything said and done, Elvis's his heart was in gospel music, but he did love the blues. He loved country. He did basically, you name it, he did it. I mean, his catalog was so extensive. It's not funny. I mean, the body of work's incredible. We know he didn't write the songs, but he could cover them pretty well.
Yeah, I think we've joked about it a few times that he didn't write a song, but that's okay. Yeah, especially that early stuff. I have to be honest. When I listened to the Sun recordings on Spotify right through, it knocked me out. It's pretty good. That Mystery Train, and being a guitar-based show, we're going to probably talk about Scotty and how Scotty was doing that. And just easy stuff, isn't it? But so good. And so what do we know about Scotty Moore?
So Scotty Moore is an interesting guy. We know he's quite conservative looking. Took a back seat. Was he playing a Gibson or a Gretsch?
Gibsons. I'm sure they were Gibsons.
Gibsons, yep.
I'm sure they were.
So a lot of people don't know this. A lot of people don't know this. Like, for example, we talk about the Sun song, Blue Moon of Kentucky. A lot of, and everybody calls these guys hicks and rednecks and stuff, but these guys were raised on not only country music and gospel, but jazz. So you mix all those three together and you have what's called Western swing. So Western swing is just a beautiful sound. It's upbeat. It is, how would you describe it? Quite technical, very melodic, and you have to be good to play it.
I think you've jumped past something that's very important. Blue Moon of Kentucky. Now, you just can't mention that song and not talk about the fact that that song was a song held in high regard by a lot of people in the South because it was performed and written by, well, made famous by Bill Monroe and who's his backing band? Bill Monroe.
Bobcats.
No,
Fat Cats.
The bluegrasses or blue, but
the Blue Boys.
What's interesting about that song, to muck around with that song, but that was very clever though, wasn't it? Again, so I can't remember. Was that an Elvis? Did Elvis conspire to do that version of that song, or was that Sam Phillips? Because straight away that song gave it to an audience who knew it, but they weren't listening to a mandolin version. They were listening to a rocker.
I think the song's testimony, not only that song, Mystery Train, Old Shep, I think you see a young guy that was very much in tune with not only his surroundings, but his environment and how he was raised. It wasn't just blues, it was gospel, it was folk songs, it was Western swing, it was rockabilly, just a melting pot. The southern states are just I think the bedrock for most music that we love.
Yeah, Simon's right. So Scotty played, and sorry to interrupt you because you're talking about Scotty. So Scotty played a Gibson Super 400.
A big hollow body thing, eh?
Yeah. And Scotty was, Soda Pop saying Scotty was a great player. And yeah, fat body Gibson early on, yeah.
Yeah. And it's quite funny because we know Scotty Moore was a big influence on not only guitar players, but the British guitar players, but I think he was the most influential on Jimmy Page. So much so when we hear that Song Remains the Same, 75, that DVD.
Yep.
And we see the amazing concert and the Led Zeppelin songs, but they do in the middle they do a medley of Scotty Moore, don't they?
Yeah. Well, I know. I certainly know. I can't reference how influential Scotty was for Jimmy Page. Other than that, we know that Jimmy was a skiffle guy, and most of those guys were influenced by obviously Elvis, but we certainly know that the Beatles were, and Keith Richards, because he talks about him in his biography, doesn't he?
Yeah. I think that Keith, by default, can't help but always fall back on Chuck Berry and Muddy Waters style licks. So there's no real Scotty Moore stuff there, and Brian Jones as well. Beatles for sure. George Harrison, yes, and Jimmy Page. So, and the other thing I want to mention is what Scotty Moore brought to the table was when we think of blues and Otis Rush, we think of the crying sound and the wailing sound, which is minor scales, minor chords.
Yeah.
The Western swing is, as we know, major chords and major scales. So Jimmy Page was clever enough to interweave the two. Keith Richards a little bit later on, when he got a bit more technical, could do that. But Mick Taylor for sure could play the major and the minor chords simultaneously together. So
I think what Scotty provided a lot of these young British cats with was an example of how to play technically good.
Yes.
Because he was playing basically through an amp, and you listen to those recordings, there's no distortion, and we all know that distortion can hide, your abilities sometimes. And if you to play clean and to hit those notes, you've got to be technically proficient, don't you?
Yeah. We're talking about a 30, 40 watt amp, like you say, there's no pedals. There's a lot of reverb. It's very clean. You got to be pretty much on the money.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's what a lot of these. Yeah, no surprise that Clapton and Page and Keith and Mick Taylor went on to be great guitar players, because they were listening to this stuff and they were trying to reproduce it, and they were doing it pretty well at an early age.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, those like you said, the Sun recordings, the stripped down drum kit, the slap bass, the guitar, and then Elvis occasionally with his acoustic guitar. What a sound! I mean,
so is it true, that they were recording Elvis and he was just singing gospel and some tired old stuff, and Sam goes out and has a ciggy or a beer or something, and Elvis is standing there, and Scotty and Elvis and the rest of the guys do "That's All Right, Mama." Is that correct? Is that the song?
It's been 20 years since I read the book. I read about 3 Elvis books. One of the best book I ever read was which was basically, because there's a lot of dud books, people's own interpretation of how Elvis was. But this one particular book was called Elvis in the Mississippi Mafia, or his closest buddies. They're all interviewing him. But I have heard that. What's that?
Yeah, and Sam comes in and hears them towards the end of the song, and he goes, "What's that? What's that?" And they looked at him, and and he said, "Play it." So he rolls the tape, and the rest is history.
Yeah, because Sun Recording Studios was basically like a movie theatre or a drive-through fast food place. You'd put your $5 in, and they give you a 45. They'll cut some wax, and it was just basically, if you got some money, we'll record you. So it's very much what they call a mum and pop store, a very small independent label.
But I think that these white guys were doing that kind of stuff anyway. For Elvis and Scotty and those other cats to just get in there into the groove and sing and play that, they must have had some experience in doing that and playing that elsewhere, which wasn't considered commercial, respectful, when you consider the climate in the South back there, when they're recording or trying to put some tracks down for the market, they're trying to sing, some gospel songs, and Sam's saying, "No, I don't want this. I want something else."
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny because we listen to the media talk about segregation and the blacks and the whites, and people forget there was white sharecroppers. There was poor white trash. I mean, Elvis was raised in what they call a shotgun shack, was basically a caravan on wheels, that happened to have the wheels taken off and was called a house.
It's a shrine now.
Yeah. So
we're not talking about Graceland too.
Yeah, I mean, and we saw the Johnny Cash movie, which Joaquin Phoenix did a great job. They were picking cotton, those white guys. So these guys were living the same life as a lot of these blues guys. They were paycheck to paycheck. I mean, I've stayed in Memphis, and it is hot. It's humid. It's the Delta, a little bit like Waikato. It's low-lying. Times are tough there. It's not a affluent city. It's farming. It's rural. So these guys, were basically salt of the earth. So the reason why Elvis had feeling, and a lot of those white guys had feeling, is because not only were they living it, but they were, when you mentioned, they didn't just roll up to the recording studio and play guitar. They were raised in Pentecostal churches. And the Pentecostal church is very lively, very, what they call rapture, caught up, and it's just natural for them later on to maybe discover Bill Monroe or Little Richard, pick up a guitar. They've already been singing most of their life. Let's just record this now.
I think what's also really interesting about Elvis from an artistic point of view too is that, he had a reputation for walking around wearing, he was smartly dressed, and but he just wasn't wearing Levi's and t-shirts. He was wearing colors, and a lot of people have documented that. He was. Can you use the word flamboyant? Is is
Well,
that the word?
He probably saw pictures of Little Richard on album covers, and we remember the famous gold suit. But prior to that, I imagine, and a lot of people suffer this who've never had money. You want to look like money by wearing nice clothes. It builds your self-esteem. So he was, definitely part of that.
So how important was he for the Rolling Stones?
I think really important for definitely Mick Jagger, because as confident as and as talented as we see Mick Jagger now, and when you read a lot of the early interviews, it took a lot of courage for him to say, I'm going to front the band, I'm going to be the singer. And when they saw, your Elvises and your Buddy Hollys and your Everly Brothers to a lesser extent, I can do this. So, it's like rugby, or Richie McCaw, or John Kerwin, or Michael Jones. I can do this. All it takes is someone that you feel is similar to you to actually do it. You're like, wow, if they can do it, I can do it.
I remember watching the anthology series that came out a few years ago of the Beatles, and I remember they were interviewing John Lennon, and John Lennon said that they went to movies and to see an Elvis film, or there was something anyway, and it was Elvis, and they're sitting there, and Elvis comes on, and all of a sudden all the girls in this Liverpool thing start screaming, and he goes, now that's a job I want to do.
Yeah. Well, wasn't there the famous album shot of the Hamburg in '62, and they all had black leather jackets and white T-shirts and the hair slicked back?
But Elvis was pretty cool. I remember I would have been probably about 12 or 13, and it must have been the Easter break, Easter holiday, and it's hard for you guys in the UK and North America to understand this, but it wasn't that long ago when in New Zealand we only had one TV channel, and then we had two TV channels. So Carl and I can remember that. So anyway, there was they put on television the Elvis, the '68 comeback tour.
Absolutely.
And I remember sitting there, and Elvis didn't figure much on my radar because he was, old music. But I remember sitting there watching this guy, and he was slim, and he had his black hair, and he was in leathers, and all of a sudden he's just singing some of this great stuff. I'm going, wow, he's pretty cool.
It's well, it's interesting you mentioned that the '68 comeback special. That was a big deal for him because that was kind of him returning back to the Sun sessions, where it was stripped down, it was laid back in the sense of his friends, people he trusted, and he was just getting back to his roots. Because prior to that, from when we got out of the army, it was full on. It was movies, it was dud songs, it was memorabilia and fans and getting married and living this kind of profile.
And Elvis is sitting down there playing the guitar, but you want to check out Scotty. Gee, he's good.
There's three parts to Elvis, eh? There's the Sun sessions. There's the interim where he goes to the army, he comes back from the army, and he did some great albums, and then he did all the movies, and then the '68 comeback special was a big deal. And then he did that great song called Suspicious Minds, and he did a great album called, I'll get the album later. And then, unfortunately, the final closing stages was the 70s, was with the Las Vegas, the bloating, the pills, which is this decline, which is really sad. So there was 3 parts to Elvis. You know, there was the raw kid, the rockabilly cat. Then there was the Hollywood guy, he still had it. And then there was Las Vegas guy. Real shame.
You only 42.
It's unbelievable. And we all think, I'm 42, and we all think that, I thought 42 back then was not necessarily old, but I thought that it was old for a musician. But looking back, he was still young, super young.
Well, for all you young people out there, you know, back in New Zealand schools, we had blackboards, and the teacher would write something, and we would get out our handwriting books and do some handwriting. And I remember Miss Stark was her name. She came to school and was sitting there, and she grabs the chalk and she writes on the blackboard, "The King of Rock and Roll died today."
Wow, really?
Yeah. That was my that, and we go, "He's the king." And then she told us Elvis Presley. Oh, okay. And then you go home and and then that's how I knew about Elvis Presley, I suppose. Pretty cool. Influential, certainly. A lot of the people that we listened to Elvis, and his legacy. But yeah, you're right, Carl. And it seems to be a theme of some of the shows we've been talking about recently. There's a lot of bad outcomes for a lot of these people. And 42, man, that's young.
I read this somewhere, and I don't know if it's just folklore or a fact, but he wrote a note before he died. He said, "I'm the loneliest person in the world." And it was, I'm not sure if it's fact or not, but it was pretty sad.
I haven't heard that, but well, I'm not an Elvis expert, so.
But I tell you what, Elvis touched people. I mean, there was something about him that touched people. Forget about his good looks or his, I guess he had charisma, but I mean, a bit like Michael Jackson in a way, he transcended above not only American sound, but the world. You got fan clubs left, right, and center. I mean, there was a Japanese president, and he just loved him. The guy that looked like Richard Gere.
Yeah, but he's also a contradiction too, wasn't he? You know, because he signs up to this deal with who's the crook? Who's the guy who said he wasn't a crook?
Colonel Tom Parker?
No, the president, Nixon. He signs up with Nixon. You know that he's a special agent, FBI, drug enforcement agent, or something like that. And you know, and then he becomes a drug user. The Beatles hold him in high regard, and that's really interesting because the Beatles go to his pad, and think, and they're going, "Oh well, you know, we're going to go and see Elvis. We're going to go," and they're nervous as heck. And Elvis is just sitting there playing a bass guitar, and then comes up, and I suppose how long it takes for a couple of cats to sort of get used to each other, and then apparently they jam. You know, isn't it a shame that we didn't have live streaming back then? Just imagine what that would have been like. You know, and then he sort of tells them that that they're great. He loves them, and thinks what they're doing is pretty cool. And then they leave, and he picks up the phone and he tries to knock them to the FBI that they're un-American.
Well, that famous picture of Elvis with those famous Elvis shades and the white jumpsuit shaking Nixon's hand, he was high as a kite.
Yeah. So I'm not making a judgment, guys. I'm just we're just talking about a guy, but I think the thing that we have to bear in mind is we're all contradictions. we're all mysteries. And
I could speak for 3 or 4 hours about Elvis. I'll narrow it down to some finer points.
yeah,
Because Elvis really wanted to be a tough guy. He did judo, played a bit of football with his buddies, but deep down he was a sweet, sensitive soul. And when his mother died, a big part of him died with her, and he was never quite the same. So a lot of that bravado with the shades and the president and the drugs and shooting the TV with the pistol, which was true, was just him trying to live out an alter ego that wasn't quite there, So, and when you got time and money, you can do that. You can surround yourself with bodyguards. You can take drugs to make yourself feel empowered. You can buy pistols, and you can maybe do a mob hit if you feel like it. But he got, I wouldn't say reckless, but he definitely imploded, which was sad. Slowly.
Yeah, so Simon's made a good point here, in the chat. Money can't buy you happiness, but it can buy you misery and comfort. Yeah, and, there's a long line of musicians in that category. Disagree with you.
Yeah. There was a famous line, and I don't like it. I think this is the media just stirring stuff up. And I'd like to put it to bed. It said that, and it haunted Elvis for most of his career, that he said the only thing a coloured can do or a black can do is buy my records and shine my shoes. And it haunted him for his career. And a couple of reporters picked up on it. One white reporter, hounded him on it, and a black reporter hounded him on it. And the black reporter got some inside word from people that knew Elvis who were black, said Elvis was not like that. And one guy actually visited Graceland, a black guy, and said he was the utmost gentleman and showed me the utmost courtesy. But one of my favourite Elvis stories of all time was in Memphis when Elvis had a bit of time on his hands. He was in Graceland walking down the street. And there was a black lady looking at a Cadillac. And he walked up to her and said, "What do you think of that car?" And she said, "I'd love it." And he said, "Well, you can have it." That was the kind man that never had money, that had money and was still kind. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So that's how I'd like to remember Elvis, is the humble guy that loved his family, a patriot, raw talent, that was very much the roots, the gospel man, the rock man, the hillbilly cat, they called him. So, RCA and Hollywood and the movies, that's not Elvis to me. I know it made money. I know it kept Priscilla happy. I know it gave him Graceland, stuff he never had before. But I think Elvis was probably happiest when he was with his mother in the Sun Studios and maybe eating a bit of fried chicken and drinking some iced tea.
Yeah, well, there's some great recent books I know that have come out. There's a guy called, I'm not going to pronounce his name, Gorylniak, and he's got a two-volume book on Elvis. I'm not going to read it, but I think the good thing about a lot of the music, the musical biographies that we're getting over the last 5 years, certainly we've got a caliber of scholarship out there, and some of the research that these guys are doing is phenomenal. I think about 15 years ago, we were getting a lot of hacks just producing books, and we certainly saw them on the Beatles too, just writing stuff that was just, garbage. But I don't know a lot about Elvis, to be fair, other than the stuff that we all know. He certainly was a sad guy, and 42 is just a tragedy, actually.
Yeah. It's almost like it's almost like, wow, you have nothing, but you had everything. You got everything, but you've had nothing. So I don't know. I just think that what I'm excited about him the most is his favourite music of all, and he would sneak into the black churches for inspiration. He loved gospel, and they would warm up the Las Vegas shows with some old time gospel. And you mentioned YouTube and some classic footage. There's footage of him raw in a circle, singing some old time hymns.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing with you mentioned him earlier with Johnny Cash. You know, Johnny Cash wasn't a country singer. His first love was gospel.
Yep. And I'm glad you mentioned Johnny Cash, because another guy that doesn't get enough credit, and Elvis kind of beat him because Carl Perkins unfortunately had a car accident, blue suede shoes.
Yeah. Look, you have to admit though that his version is just that's one song where the cover blows the version away, the original away.
Oh, are you talking about Elvis's version?
Yes.
Blows Carl's away.
Yes.
Wow. And the Beatles, as we know, do an amazing version.
In my opinion. It's only my opinion.
Yeah.
Of course.
So, and you mentioned before about Son and why Elvis got the nod. I guess, well, Carl Perkins was about to be big, and he had that car accident. Elvis was basically the guy that basically said, "You're on, you're it," and that's all it took.
What about? I'm starting to remember some stuff now. What about that movie, Great Balls of Fire? And you got the killer. What's his name?
Jerry Lee.
You got Jerry Lee. There's a great scene in that movie where the killer is in the recording studio. Obviously, it must be Sun Studios. And Elvis walks past. Well, the guy, acting as Elvis, he walks past and he sees Jerry in there, and he opens up the door and he says, "You can have it all. It's all yours." Because Elvis the next day was taking the bus off to do his national service.
Yeah.
I wonder how true that was. Yeah.
Yeah. Those guys were. Jerry Lee Lewis was Louisiana, Carl Perkins Memphis, Elvis Presley Memphis. The Southern boys, they're all quite competitive, eh? And they all had similar upbringings, very Pentecostal, very poor, and obviously went on, all. And speaking of great albums, there's the what's that album called? There's a famous album in the '80s called The Sun Legends or something. Where Elvis, sorry, not Elvis had died, but it was Carl Perkins, Jerry Lee, and someone else, and it was just amazing stuff. They all got back together, but no, I think Elvis is an enigma. He's definitely, unfortunately, he's a little bit watered down, but overall, he is integral to music in general.
Oh yeah. Well, the guys that are the theme behind what we do. The Rolling Stones. Keith has said it himself. That one of his earliest idols and influences was Scotty Moore, and I totally agree with you. I think Mick saw in Elvis something that he could do as a singer, and Elvis. What do the Beatles keep saying? America was this beacon of color, of excitement, of brilliance, this ray of light.
Yep.
And Elvis was the epitome of that, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we talked about this before. When did the war end? It was 43 to 48.
39 to 46, 45.
46.
45.
And then obviously you had the automobile industry came into light. You had color TV, electricity. You had McDonald's. You had movie theaters, Hollywood, Humphrey Bogart.
The post-war boom.
Post-war boom. It was young girls. The economy was good. You know, colorful cars, guitars, rock and roll. It was just, they happened to be where it was be, you know. And wow. I mean, look at the movies we love. We talked about Back to the Future. We forgot to mention a great movie called American Graffiti.
Outstanding.
I mean,
Steven Spielberg, is that right?
Yeah, Ron Howard too, wasn't it?
Yeah, Steven Spielberg. Yeah, that was like a, yeah, Ron Howard. Yeah, outstanding movie.
So I guess Elvis, in a way, I mean, as much as Marlon Brando portrayed it in the movies, Elvis portrayed it through music. The young rebel, you know, nothing to lose, the James Dean, but he had talent. Every parent's nightmare, every child's fantasy, you know, cool, I guess was the word.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm going to suggest, if you guys in the chat haven't checked it out, it's on Spotify, which is great. It's the complete Sun recordings, and it's got all the outtakes. It's about 40 songs. It's phenomenal. It's pretty good. That gave me a different appreciation of Elvis.
Oh, absolutely. He I guess Sun in a way is similar to Chess and Cobra and Atlantic. A lot of those 45s, they were just snippets, captures of time that can never be replaced.
There's one thing though that we haven't mentioned. I think you touched on it earlier, but Simon's brought it up in the chat. This is quoting Simon. I think Colonel Tom Parker had much to answer for, and that's when we're talking about the demise or the negativity that was happening during Elvis's career. You know, we're all aware that I'm sure, you know, Elvis wanted to get out of doing those movies, and the Colonel said, no, you know, we've signed you in. I don't know if this is true or not, but Elvis wanted to tour. He wanted to, you know, go to Europe. I don't know if that's true. He didn't, never toured outside of America. But is that because of the time? Is that because of?
Yeah. I mentioned that before, that Elvis was caught in two minds. Part of him was like, my childhood was happy, but it was poor. I'm in this position now where I'm wealthy, but I'm controlled. And he was caught. And Colonel would say, listen, Elvis, you've signed this contract. You've got 8 movies to do in 8 years. You know, what are you going to do? Break the contract and be a nobody, or are you going to keep on the roller coaster?
I think this is related to what you're just saying, and it's one of the comments in the chat, and I totally agree with it. But what's up, Doc, saying, I hate to bring this up as I wasn't there, but a lot of the upper middle classes were stealing from the lower classes and making it famous, regardless the original influences come through, if willing. Look, yeah, I dig what you're saying. There was something about those early Sun recordings, and clearly they were by guys that were of the lower classes. And then you go and listen to some of the stuff that they did with RCA, where they were molding it for the Candy Floss generation. Yeah, I agree with you.
Well, it's interesting because the Sun box set I could recommend to anybody. It is raw, it's real.
Yep.
There's white, black, brown, yellow, all people of different colors on that particular box set. It's unbelievable. They actually have a gospel side, a rock and roll side, a blues side, and a rockabilly side. It's like 4 albums. It's unbelievable. That being said, when Elvis signed RCA, they bought the Sun rights, and then all of a sudden his music started to become a bit more, I wouldn't say overproduced, but Chet Atkins influenced, bigger bands, horns.
Safer.
That's the word. Conservative, appealing to the mainstream. So
here's an interesting comment, and I didn't know this, but Tom Parker was an illegal immigrant
from Holland
and couldn't leave the US.
After the fact, it turned out that he was a Dutch immigrant that never had his paperwork.
Yeah, well, I didn't know that. So hence Elvis not leaving the States.
Good point. I didn't think about that. Yeah. Nah. He was definitely a bit of a bully.
Yeah. I just well, he certainly made a lot of money, didn't he? And a
lot of those musicians are tied into contracts they can't get out. It's a real shame. Elvis's story is one of many where, there's that saying, dance with the devil or sold your soul to rock and roll. It's quite sad. It's here's potential freedom at the behest of an piece of ink on your piece of paper, your signature. Here's $1 million that accompanies that ink. But what are you going to do for me? Give me 10 years of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's
so when they break from these contracts, a lot of them, unbelievable freedom. And that's another story within itself.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I just flicked through a Tom Petty book a couple of days ago, and Tom Petty did the same thing. Was with a record company. They sold that record company to another record company, and he said, "You can't sell me. I wasn't part of this deal," and took them on, and he won.
Wow.
And he said the same thing. It drove him mental, having to go through this process. But once they turned around and said, "Okay, see you later," it was like, wow.
Because it's a contradiction if you're a true artist. If you're a true artist, you go into a studio and say, "This is what I've got to offer."
That's exactly what Tom Petty said. Exactly.
If you're a greedy record company, they tell you what to do.
Yeah. I can't work for a record company and produce all the stuff. These Century City lawyers. Yeah. And Neil Young did the same thing too, with Gaffin. Gaffin said, "But we want a record. We want a Neil Young record." And he's going, "I've given you 5, but that's crap what you're giving us. We want,
Can you imagine someone telling you, "We need a hit"?
Yeah.
I mean, What's a hit? What is a hit?
They did the same thing to Clapton too. We want another Layla. We want another Layla. And he's going,
you can only do what you can do.
Yeah. So so he wrote Bad Love instead. Well, co-wrote it. But yeah. Managers and recording companies, man.
Well, there's some very sad stories that relate to that particular arrangement. You've got the business arrangement, which is mechanical and structured and checks and balances, and you got the talent arrangement, which does a lot of these guys never finish school. They don't have degrees. They're not accountants, but they need, obviously, we're all caught up in the glitz and the glamour. That's human nature, nice car, nice house, that sort of thing.
Nice guitar.
Those two worlds combine. It can either be good or bad.
Yeah.
So, part of the journey, I guess.
Hey, I've enjoyed this show.
Yeah. Awesome.
How many films did Elvis make? 20 or 30? It was over 20, wasn't it?
Good question. I don't know. I know that he did Love Me Tender. It started 56, and it went all up to about probably 1968. You know, I don't know. Probably 2 a year, 10 years, 20.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I remember watching King Creole, and that was pretty cool. That's pretty cool. And Jailhouse Rock's pretty cool.
33.
What? What?
Yeah. So wow, what a workaholic. What a workaholic.
Wow.
So yeah. 33. Some good, some not so good.
Yeah, I remember one where he's a speedway driver, and that's like really bad. And there's one where he's acting as a double. Was that Kissing Cousins?
Yeah.
And that's like really bad. And GI Blues is the only good thing about GI Blues is the song. That's bad too. Oh my gosh.
Oh, he did a lot of bad, watered down blues songs, and I'll never forget where I was with my Texas buddies, and he was sitting in the back of a truck or a little ute, singing "Old MacDonald Had a Farm" to a child.
Who? Elvis.
Yeah, or something like that.
And Viva Las Vegas with Anne Margaret. That yeah, just yeah, yeah.
And in actuality, he actually wanted to be appreciated as a good actor, but he never had the time to perfect his craft because these movies were like commercials. They were in and out. They were money makers. So,
well, Simon's making a point. That's what Tom Parker signed him up for, just cash-ins. So I saw a biopic one a long time ago where Kurt Russell acted as Elvis, and I remember, I think Kurt Russell was saying, "Please, can you get me a decent part?" Yeah, you're right, Carl. Yeah. Clearly, he was asking to get a decent part because he realized that these were just rubbish himself.
Well, I tell you, one of the best Elvis movies I've ever seen is that. Who's that Irish guy? He played Reese somebody. He played tennis, movie guy. He did an amazing Elvis movie. Reese Myers.
Oh yeah.
It was like a TV movie, miniseries. Yeah. We'll see what let's have a look at the ratings. Mystery Train.
So were you doing some research?
Oh no, the phone went. But lots of crappy Elvis movies, but this was a good one. Jonathan Rhys Meyers, an Irish guy, did a great job playing Elvis. and he had his personality down, which is basically, like you said before, Colonel Tom Parker was this tall Dutch, overweight guy with a cigar and a suit, and I guess a surrogate father figure in the sense of like a candy man. And Elvis was like, well, yes, sir, you know, not willingly, but obligingly, you know. So a horrible predicament to be in.
What's the title called?
Sorry?
What's the title of the series called?
Oh, it's just a mini-series called Elvis with
Oh, okay,
Jonathan.
just okay.
Yeah, it's a TV thing. But I thought it was really well done. I personally think that the Irish guy really brought out the vulnerability, the youth of Elvis. It was really good.
I'll check it out.
It's real good.
Cool.
So real quick, in closing our little series, in conjunction with Elvis, the same kind of guy, unfortunately, tragically cut down in Ollie. Wow. What a guy.
I'm looking forward to next week's show. Should we tell people what next week's going to be about now?
Muddy.
Yeah. Mud.
Oh, I quickly want to give Buddy Holly a shout out because he was part of that bunch in the 50s. Stripped down band, showman, songwriter, unbelievable talent, humble background, played a Stratocaster.
We made the Stratocaster famous.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So and you yourself being a big Beatles fan, once again, the Rolling Stones did not fade away, but Buddy Holly was huge.
Well, they named the band after the Beatles, you know, like Buddy Holly and the Crickets. Yeah.
Is that right? I didn't know that. Is that a fact? Wow.
But also from a songwriting point of view too, because, you know, John and Paul were listening to these chords and they loved the fact that Buddy was putting these chords where the chord shouldn't go. And I can't remember the actual details, but Paul McCartney's talking to Ronnie Wood on the Ronnie Wood show a couple of years ago. It's not that old. There's a clip on YouTube, and I can't remember the song, but they're maybe it was Peggy Sue, I don't know. And anyway, and they go, oh, what's that chord? Oh, and it's an A. So, you know, they're putting chords where they shouldn't go, and that's obviously influenced the Beatles because there's a lot of their songs where you know, they're putting chords where.
Well, what Buddy Holly did, which is quite unique, and you can hear it a little bit with the Not Fade Away solo, which is just basically the D played all the way out there, is Buddy had a unique knack of making those simple chords ring, and simple is best. So yeah, Buddy Holly deserves a lot of credit. I don't know what he did, but what he did, people liked.
So I'm just going to do a shout out. I have to do a shout out because Soda Pop is going to sleep because it's probably 2:30 where he is. So thanks for joining us, Soda Pop. Always a pleasure having you jump in on the chat.
Awesome. On that note, talk a bit about myself.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Simon. Always appreciate your comments. And Soda Pop. And also, we were lucky enough to have Guitar Girl. Sorry, we didn't mention you online live. Sorry, but I said g'day to Guitar Girl in the chat. So thanks for popping by. And what's up, Doc? Awesome. Always cool to hear from you too. And we'll take it easy. And I'll go and have some dinner.
Nice.
What about you? It must be dinner time for you too.
As Elvis and Buddy Holly would say, we're going to have some supper.
Some supper. Going to have some beans and grits.
The Friday.
Hey, cool. So next week's show, I think we should let Carl finish off talking about Buddy, and then we'll start talking about Muddy. How does that sound?
Yeah, no, great.
Buddy and Muddy.
Yeah,
the Buddy and Muddy show.
Well, it's quite cool because, I mean, we talked about Elvis and what he brought to the table, which is basically lots of energy, a lot of youth, a lot of raw talent. And then obviously with Buddy Holly, following on from Bo Diddley last week, Buddy Holly basically, I wouldn't say stole, but borrowed the Not Fade Away from the Bo Diddley beat, which was integral to not only the American sound, but that great song Not Fade Away, which the Rolling Stones, I think, was one of their first biggest hits.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm not going to say stole. I'm going to say borrowed.
Yeah. And, I mean, obviously this is a Rolling Stone theme show, but these guys were huge on the British movement.
Absolutely.
Beatles, during the Pacemakers, Animals, Yardbirds. It just goes on and on and on. We mentioned Jimmy Page was a huge Scotty Moore fan. And Jimmy Page was clever enough and talented enough to learn those Scotty Moore solos. And those Scotty Moore solos, 10 years later, would just turned up to 10 on Marshall stacks.
Well, Clapton, there's a couple of clips on YouTube with Clapton playing with Scotty too.
Is that right?
You know, so yeah, hugely influential. Absolutely, and that's the theme of our show, isn't it? You know, the Stones and British blues, and what goes into that pot to contribute what these guys are.
And what I like about this particular Elvis and Buddy Holly and the not to bring up race, white or black, but those southern states was a melting pot, not only of people, but of gospel, country, western swing, rockabilly, rock and roll, folk music, storytelling. You know, we're talking 3-4 generations of people working the land. It was, you know, real people doing real things.
Real people doing real work.
Exactly, that's it. You know, so the British guys through the blues would have seen this powerful man's music, but through this other music, they would have identified with some of the Scotch, Irish folk songs, but they would have seen a new music and a new movement coming along, you know. So I think in a way it brought a lot of colour to those grey clouds in Britain.
Awesome. Awesome. So we'll catch you guys next week.
Let's enjoy it. See ya.